For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings survived without modern waterproof clothing, permanent houses, or any of the technology we rely on today. No raincoats, no brick houses, no dry clothes waiting beside a warm fire, and yet, somehow, we are still here. Some archaeologists now believe something even stranger, that the rain itself may have helped shape who we became. Imagine standing in the middle of an open landscape with nowhere to hide. The sky turns almost black. Rain begins as a gentle whisper, then becomes a relentless wall of water. Hour after hour, day after day, the ground softens beneath your feet. You can feel yourself sinking a little deeper with every step. Rivers swell beyond their banks. Every branch is soaked. Every rock is slick and cold. By every modern assumption, surviving a week like this should be nearly impossible. And yet, for hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors lived through storms far worse than most of us will ever face. They crossed Ice Age landscapes, tropical forests, windswept plains, and mountain valleys where rain could fall for days without mercy. So how did they do it? How did early humans survive endless storms without any of the technology we take for granted today? And here's the part almost nobody expects. Archaeologists now believe rain may not have just threatened early humans. It may have helped shape some of our greatest innovations, and maybe even the cooperation, planning, and problem-solving that define our species. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll never look at a rainy day the same way again. For generations, popular imagination has painted prehistoric people as helpless wanderers, constantly battling nature. Movies love this image. Desperate families shivering under a tree while lightning crashes overhead. It feels believable because we judge the past through the comforts of the present. Without modern shelter, surviving prolonged rain seems unimaginable, but the archaeological evidence tells a completely different story. Humans did not simply endure nature. They studied it. Long before written history, people understood landscapes with extraordinary precision. They knew which hills stayed dry after heavy rain, which valleys flooded first, where the wind changed direction, which rock formations offered natural protection. Survival depended less on brute strength than on knowledge passed down, generation after generation. So maybe the real question isn't how did they survive? Maybe the real question is, why did we ever assume they shouldn't have? The first clue is hiding in caves. Sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa preserve traces of human occupation going back tens of thousands of years. Spain's Altamira Cave, France's Chauvet Cave, painted more than 35,000 years ago. South Africa's Blombos Cave, showing signs of human activity nearly 100,000 years old. These weren't just emergency hideouts. They offered stable temperatures, protection from wind and rain, and safe places where fire could burn even in the worst weather. But here's the twist nobody tells you. Most ancient humans didn't actually live in caves. Caves survive in the archaeological record because stone lasts. But most communities spent their time in open-air camps, shelters made of wood, branches, animal hide, and plant fiber. And those don't survive 10,000 years, let alone 100,000. Which means our entire picture of prehistoric life is quietly biased toward the places that happen to survive, not the places people actually lived. So archaeologists had to look for the clues that don't preserve as easily. And they found something remarkable. At a site called Terra Amata in southern France, researchers uncovered rings of post holes, stone arrangements, and animal bone concentrations, evidence that early humans built large shelters using wooden poles anchored with stone, as far back as 400,000 years ago. 400,000. That's not just before agriculture. That's before our own species even existed in its modern form. Shelter wasn't invented when villages appeared. It evolved slowly, quietly, over almost the entire span of human history. And here's something that might genuinely surprise you. At several ancient sites, archaeologists have found the same hearths reused again and again, layer after layer, sometimes spanning thousands of years. That means certain locations weren't just one-time campsites. They were seasonal homes, returned to year after year, generation after generation, long before anyone ever built a permanent village. But shelter only solved half the problem, because rain creates a second danger, one that's arguably more deadly. Fire. For early humans, fire wasn't a convenience. It was warmth, cooked food, protection from predators, hardened tools, light in the dark, and the glue that held communities together at night. Lose your fire in a week of non-stop rain, and you could lose everything. At first, keeping a flame alive through an endless storm sounds nearly impossible. But here's what the evidence actually shows. They didn't, not exactly. The secret wasn't relighting a fire every single morning. It was protecting one fire so it never had to go out. People placed hearths beneath rock overhangs, inside sheltered nooks, in spaces carefully chosen to block wind and water. Thick pieces of hardwood could smolder, not blaze, just glow, for hours, sometimes for an entire day, quietly holding a living ember that could roar back to life the moment conditions allowed. They weren't making fire, they were keeping it. And that one shift, from creation to preservation, changed everything. Picture it for a moment. A child asleep beneath a hide shelter while rain pounds overhead without pause. Outside, one adult crouches in the dark, quietly shielding a bed of glowing embers with carefully stacked wood, feeding it just enough to survive the night without ever letting it catch and burn out too fast. That single patient decision, repeated hour after hour, determines whether everyone wakes up to a hot meal or faces another freezing, hungry day. But storms didn't just shape shelter and fire, they shaped movement itself. Today, we check the weather app before we leave the house. Ancient humans didn't have a forecast. They were the forecast. Generations of careful observation taught them how clouds moved differently over mountains, how birds changed direction before a storm hit, how insects reacted to rising humidity, how certain winds carried the smell of rain hours before the first drop fell. Some indigenous communities today still carry fragments of this same knowledge, a reminder that careful observation can rival any piece of modern technology. And rain wasn't only a threat. It reshaped the landscape into something more generous. Fresh water became easy to find. Animal tracks softened into mud, easier to follow. Certain prey gathered in predictable places after a storm passed. Some plants only became edible or easier to find after heavy rainfall. The relationship between early humans and the weather was never a one-sided battle. It was a negotiation, and the people who understood the terms of that negotiation had an advantage the outsiders never saw coming. And now, the most surprising discovery of all. Archaeologists increasingly believe that harsh environments didn't just test early humans. They built something in us. Try to imagine surviving one full week of relentless rain completely alone. Finding shelter is harder. Keeping fire alive is harder. Hunting is harder. Staying alert to danger is harder. Now imagine the same week but inside a group. Some gather fuel. Others repair the shelter. The most experienced hunters track prey through the mud. The elders pass down knowledge that took a lifetime to earn. The children stay protected in the middle, where it's safest. Extreme weather may have quietly rewarded one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Not sharper teeth, not greater speed, but the ability to cooperate at scale. Storms may have punished the ones who competed for information and rewarded the ones who shared it. And that changes the entire story. Rain wasn't just an obstacle our ancestors overcame. It was an invisible force that helped shape human society itself. And without learning to survive storms together, humanity might never have spread into every corner of the earth. From frozen tundras to tropical rainforests to windswept coastlines. Of course, old legends love to exaggerate prehistoric hardship, endless disaster, constant struggle, barely surviving one day to the next. The real archaeological record paints something more balanced. Life was dangerous. Floods, exposure, disease, starvation. These were real and constant threats. Early humans were not helpless victims. But they weren't fearless superheroes either. They were something rarer, exceptional problem solvers. Their greatest piece of technology was never something they held in their hands. It was something they carried in their minds, knowledge of landscapes, knowledge of seasons, knowledge passed on in countless quiet conversations beside fires whose smoke disappeared into storm-darkened skies. So picture that open landscape again, the black sky, the relentless rain soaking every branch, every rock, every inch of ground beneath your feet. Only this time you're not standing there alone. You're standing there with people who've read this exact storm 100 times before. People who already know which hill stays dry, which fire will hold, which direction the deer will run once the rain finally breaks. That's the difference between chaos and a pattern waiting to be understood. And maybe that's the deepest lesson buried in this whole mystery. Long before humanity built cities strong enough to resist the weather, we survived by learning to belong within it, not despite the rain, because of it.